Hi, Lyssa here. Today I really want to dive a little deeper into this idea of expanding a growth mindset. There is a lot of thinking around how our brains work, and it is really a very incredible and exciting time when it comes to neuroscience and what we're learning. And one of the best discoveries we've had, well, maybe not the best, but right up there, is this idea of neuroplasticity. Now, neuroplasticity in and of itself isn't a good thing or a bad thing, but what it is it is a thing that our brain can do. Our brain is very much capable of changing and shifting, not just the way that we think about things like the neural networks that we have, but actual structures within our brain. We're capable of changing them and completely rewiring the way our minds work. And it is such a big part of what is possible when we consciously decide we're going to do something differently than we've been doing it before. So again, our brains have this ability to change and develop, and this neuroplasticity is really the doorway through which we can open ourselves to a growth mindset. Now, everything that we think, feel, believe, have learned, all of these things impact the way our brain is developed and designed. And so by paying attention to the things that we're focusing our attention on, we can begin to expand how our brain functions and the mindset that is attached to that functioning. It really requires some conscious attention. I write about it in my book, Storyjacking, in chapter 5, The Magic of Your Mind. And so you can always follow the link and go check out that book. But there is a lot of work by several different really important neuroscientists who have looked at just the power of our ability to do this mind-changing, mind-bending thing. So, but this really brings us to mindset. And I believe that neuroplasticity and this ability to change our brain is the doorway into different mindsets. In her book, Mindset, Carol Dweck discusses really the difference between this idea of a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. So let's start with a fixed mindset. I had a bit of a fixed mindset around the IQ test. I thought, this is what the IQ test is. It assesses whether or not you are smart, and it determines a number, and that number is what your brain is. That just is who you are as far as intelligence goes. And this is where I came to with regard to IQ when I read her book. And as I'm reading the book, what I'm learned is, and what was fabulous was that the first modern IQ test really was developed in around the 1900 by two gentlemen, Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon. And what they came up with was called the Simon-Binet IQ test. And what the purpose of it was to look at how children learn. So by taking this test, the child would answer certain questions and they could figure out what their learning style was. And as a result of that, then hopefully what would happen is children could be taught to their particular learning style. Now, mind you, that isn't what we've done with the IQ test. We've used it, we have clubs around this that are like, I'm special because I've got such a high IQ. And Alfred Binet was really very clear about a couple things. One, if you take a kid from a very depressed environment without a lot of stimulation, and you put them next to a child who's had a lot of stimulation, lots of experiences, they're going to show up differently on the IQ test. Not because one child is not capable of having the same IQ, they just have very radically different experiences, and their brain hasn't been enlivened to the same level of curiosity maybe and experience that then leads to them doing better on an IQ test. And I think that the concept of there are multiple factors that come into how smart we are. So as I'm reading this and I'm thinking about it, my own mindset around the idea of IQ being a fixed number that defines something important like how smart somebody is was blown all the way out of the water. Blown out of the water, because there are places where I'm incredibly bright and there are places where I am not. There are things that I'm very good at doing in it from a creative space or from a building things space or figuring out puzzles space, really good at that. And then on the other hand, there's other places where I'm not so good. Like if you ask me to string together a series of numbers that gets past about, I don't know, 9, I cannot do this. Like they've asked me like in different tests, like repeat back these numbers, and you get past 4 or 5 numbers and my brain is like, yeah, those numbers don't make any sense to me anymore. So it isn't that when we have an IQ of a certain number, that it's across the board either. It is really just this idea of it's one indicator amongst many indicators of how we learn, what our skill set might be, where we may need help to develop a bit more. And moving from the idea of the number being important to the number just being an indicator of where our growth opportunities are was, again, mind blown. So then shifting over to what is a growth mindset, what makes that different for those people who have a much more open growth mindset. And you see this in yourself, or you see this in kids around you or people around you, when there are certain people who see a problem, see a puzzle, and instead of seeing the problem as the problem, they see it much more as an opportunity. So this is the kid who sees the big empty puzzle or the big torn up puzzle, and it's all the different little pieces. And instead of going, I'm never going to be able to put this together, they're like, I'm ready to dig in. This is going to be so much fun. Or they have a math problem, and the math problem is complicated. And instead of being like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to figure this out, I'm not going to do it right, I'm going to get it wrong, they go instead, I'm going to figure this out, this is going to be so much fun, right? There's this attitude of there's no problem in doing it wrong. Like, who cares about doing it wrong? Every wrong time I do it, I learn something different so that when I do it again, I might do it a little bit more right. And I've had this experience, especially with cooking, where you maybe start off with a recipe, but the recipe wasn't exactly the way that you liked having it. So you tweak it a little bit and you add a little bit of this or a little bit of that. And sometimes it's like, kind of wish I hadn't done that. But the next time you do it again, but you do it slightly differently, and you're like, ooh, this is even more tasty. And you do it again and you change it just a little bit more, and you're like, nope, back again, but I need something else. And so you keep playing with it, and then before you know it, you end up with something that you're like, oh my God, speaks to my stomach, my soul, speaks to everything. And it's that idea that there isn't a wrong way of doing things, that failure isn't failure. Failure's just a step on your developmental track towards going towards something important to you. So digging into the difficult, I wanted to just briefly mention some 5 key ideas that will help you expand your own personal mindset. The first thing I just mentioned is really begin looking at problems as opportunities. If you see a problem in front of you, what is the opportunity to solve? What is it you're willing to get curious about? Which really brings me to the next one, which is to have an open mindset, is that there's more than one perspective. And to be curious, like, I have my perspective, you have your perspective, and in an open mindset and a growth mindset, I'm going to go, here's my perspective. What is your perspective? Tell me more about that. Maybe we talk to this person. What is your perspective? And what is your perspective? And let's bring all these perspectives together, because we can learn more from these different perspectives. It reminds me a little bit about the fable of the 4 blind men and the elephant, and as they're standing around the elephant, they each feel different things. They see and experience something completely different. One is like at the back of the elephant, I just feel a broom, and the other one's at the side of the elephant, it's a wall, the other one's at the trunk of the elephant, and it's like there's this huge hose, and the other one is at the leg going, it's a stump. And so these perspectives are all describing the same thing, but they're vastly different as a result of the places that we've stood, or our experiences, or our life, right, has brought us to a different perspective through a myriad of reasons. The next one is to just stay radically curious, to reflect not only upon the world, but also upon you and your experience of the world. When I'm having a really bad day, if I can just stop, breathe into it, and get curious about like what just came up for me there, that starts to shift the story to the problem for me. I'm shifting my relationship to the story of being a problem to one of, I'm really curious about what just happened here and why I'm responding and reacting the way that I am. And is that useful or not useful? And what do I want to do with what I've just learned and discovered about myself? That's all part of open mindset also. There's another piece that's really important, which is really how do you develop or cultivate grit? This stick-to-itiveness, this ability to a willingness maybe, or an ability to delay gratification so that what you can do is you can push through the difficult part of whatever the problem is that you find yourself in, so that you can also have the grit to allow yourself to not be perfect, not do it right, but to continue to try and to continue piecing the puzzle together in new ways until the pieces start to fit together. And then the final of these little elements that will help you expand your growth mindset is really to take ownership of your attitude. If you come with an attitude that is very pessimistic, very closed-minded, own it. And like I did, I had a bit of a closed mindset when it came to IQ until I started thinking about it from a different perspective. But also take ownership of the fact that you can change your mind anytime you want. And that's just as possible as anything else. So I think it's really important to remember that our mindset impacts our experience of the world. It impacts our relationship to the situations that we find ourselves in. And while the world is filled with situations and experiences that are far beyond our control, we do have the capacity to change our minds anytime we want. And not only change our mind, but even change the very structure of our brain. So shifting from this place of maybe certitude and absolutism to more openness to possibilities. So the questions that I'm going to ask you to take away with yourself today is, what is some place in your life where you would like to invite yourself to expand your mindset? Number one. And number two, how would opening your mindset and putting yourself into a growth mindset benefit you in the situation that you're talking about? Have fun with that.